It's a Friday night in September 2018. At a bar called JR's in Tecumseh, Michigan, a conversation is being had. James Allan and his wife Amy Allan are sitting at the bar having a drink. The pair had just dropped off their daughter Ashley at a high school football game. The day before, James had returned from a multi-day work trip that had him flat out exhausted. The couple chat about Ashley, James's work, and what's next for the Allan household, including a possible move that James had been contemplating. After some time, the couple gets up, leaves the bar, and returns home. Then, a little more than an hour later, a call comes into emergency services.
911, what is the address of your emergency?
Hello?
Hi, this is 911.
My wife tried to kill herself. She's in the fucking basement.
How is she trying to kill herself?
She tried to hang herself. I fucking ran down there. I pulled her off and
Okay, does she have a noose around her neck right now, or?
She did. I pulled her off. She had her extension cord.
Can somebody call
pulled her off. I tried to give her CPR. I don't feel a pulse.
What's her name? You don't feel a pulse, you said?
No, I don't. I can't go down there because the phone doesn't work down there. What do I do?
What I need you to do is go down there
Oh,
and see if she's breathing.
she's not. She's not.
Do you know how to do CPR?
Yes, I did.
Okay, go ahead. Okay, go down there and start CPR, and I'll get him on the way, okay? Can you do that for me? Sir, go downstairs and start CPR if she's not breathing, okay? And we'll get him on the way. Can you hear me?
I hear you. I'm doing CPR. Please stop.
Okay. Keep doing the CPR until we get there.
Through hysterics, James tells responding officers that he was in the master bedroom and Amy was in the basement. He said at some point he went to check on Amy. They got into a little bit of an argument at the bar, and because James didn't want to get into it, he said he went back upstairs and watched a couple of TV shows. 30 minutes later, as it was coming up on 9 p.m., James said he got up and prepared himself to pick up Ashley from the football game. When he went to the basement to get Amy, he said he saw her hanging from the ceiling with an orange extension cord wrapped around her neck. He said he quickly picked her up and put her on the floor. He then went to grab Amy's cell phone and made the 911 call. At one point, he took off his shirt to wipe vomit from Amy's mouth to do mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. There was no pulse. Paramedics then took over. At one point, James was in a prone position crying on the floor. James was inconsolable. He seemingly went through every stage of grief in a short period of time. He was yelling, crying, and acting out. When he went upstairs, he hammer-fisted a bowl of chips that was on the kitchen counter, sending the bowl flying and cutting his arm in the process, which was now bleeding on the kitchen floor. Beside that cut on his arm, he had no visible sign of injury, nothing to suggest there was any struggle between him and Amy. James said Amy had no history of mental illness. He said there has been no history of domestic violence. He said she gave no indication she would ever harm herself and gave no indication she would harm herself tonight. He said they both had about 3 beers each, but Amy's blood alcohol level was below the legal driving limit. Amy was taken to Herrick Hospital, where she was observed for any other visible injuries. There were none. She was then flown out to University of Michigan Hospital, where her status as of 6 a.m. the next day was not good. James traveled to the hospital to see her in the emergency room. In the meantime, police got consent to take Amy's phone from the home. The following day, as the responding sergeant passed off information to his day shift counterpart, he told him things just didn't seem right. 34-year-old Amy Allan was described as a friendly animal lover with crippling social anxiety, which affected her interactions with people. In fact, she was so introverted that she never really developed relationships, didn't have many friends, isolated herself, and compulsively resorted to playing video games in her alone time. She was a stay-at-home mom who, with the assistance of James, eventually took up running, rollerblading, and rock climbing to break out of her social isolation. Both Amy and James went to Planet Rock in Ann Arbor 3 times a week to work on their climbing. She grew up in Ocala, Florida, and loved reading, makeup kits, and dresses. There was nothing unusual about her life until she hit the age of 13, when she became pregnant with her son Caleb. It is reported that Amy suffered abuse from Caleb's father, which resulted in the termination of that relationship. Amy was now managing as a single mother during her high school years, with her parents filling in the gaps in parenting. Several years later, Amy would fall for James Allan. She fell in love with him in part because he didn't take issue with her being a mother at such a young age. At 19, she was pregnant with his daughter Ashley. They soon after got married, and a year before the incident, moved to Tecumseh, where they purchased a nice home for their family. Neighbors described them as a quiet couple who kept to themselves. They did not hear any arguing, but it wasn't always a bed of roses. A search warrant executed on Amy's phone revealed that she had been speaking to a man named George, a married man living on the East Coast. The texts were sexual in nature. On the day of the incident, she had the following text conversation with George. The surveillance footage at JR showed her at one point looking at her phone, which investigators believe was to communicate with George. They also observed that her mood noticeably improved when she spoke with her secret lover. Investigators needed to know what specifically happened on that Friday night. James said he got up early that morning and went to work. He left work at noon and tried to sleep, but couldn't do so properly. Amy, in the meantime, picked up Ashley's friends so she could hang out with her daughter in their home. James and Amy made dinner for them at around 6 p.m. before driving the girls to the high school football game at around 6:30 p.m. He and Amy then went to the Embers bar. After having a 16-ounce Labatt beer, they left Embers because they weren't entertained by the atmosphere and went to JR's for dessert. They each had a Stella draft beer. They then started discussing Ashley being 15, how they didn't owe anything on their cars, and what plans they had for the rest of their lives. James raised the idea that maybe they could sell the house and move to North Carolina. James had said that he planned to stay in his job until Ashley graduates, and then the two could downsize and get a house to fix up in the range of $80,000 to $100,000. But Amy was not having any of that. "That's not going to happen," he said she told him. She became negative about it, he said. He tried telling her that none of what he was saying was concrete, and that he was just raising it as a possibility. "Well, I hope that works out for you," he said she told him. He said he tried to talk to Amy, but she just stared at a wall. He declined dessert and suggested that they just go home. He cashed out just after 7:30 p.m. He said they were both upset with each other as they were leaving. He walked out of the back door without holding it open for Amy, saying it must have swung back and hit her. He was walking a fair distance in front of her, and when he turned around, she was walking away from him and crossing the street. James thought she was thinking, "F this guy, I'm just gonna walk." Amy got home at about 7:58 p.m. James was lying on the bed watching a TV show in the master bedroom. When Amy was inside, she slammed the door shut and walked upstairs. She then came back downstairs with her purse slung over her shoulder like she was leaving. James said he didn't confront her because he didn't have the energy to fight. He said when he went down into the basement, he saw her petting one of the cats. He said she told him that the only reason she walked home was because he slammed the bar door in her face. James told her he didn't slam it, he just didn't hold it open for her. She called him a dick and an effing asshole. "You're just like your boss," alluding to complaints made by James that his boss worked him like a slave. James said he told her he wasn't going to do this right now and went back upstairs. He said he went back to his room and started watching the show. He said he didn't like the show, so he started surfing his phone to see if it would get any better and if there was another show he could watch. Roughly 30 minutes later, James gets up and prepares to pick up Ashley from the football game. It's at this point that he said he needed to, quote, "squash the beef," and started walking down into the basement.
And that's when I walked down there and she's just hanging there, and I didn't know how long. At that time I hadn't assessed how long have I been away from the basement. How,
Right.
You know, what's
Right.
my timeline? Because I'm just like, holy shit, what the f***? And she's just hanging there, and she was facing like 3/4 like that, and so I just immediately like picked her up like that, and then I tried to one hand hold her and grab the thing off of her neck, and it was just too tight for me to, I was just, wasn't able to do it. And then I grabbed her up and tried setting her on the Michigan basement edge a couple times to take the thing off so I could get it. I was just so panicked, I'm screaming and stuff like that, and I look up and it's on like an open one of those. You can see it down there hanging from that. So it's like a hook like this. So I was able to grab the actual cord, lift her up and grab it off of there, and then let her fall to the ground, and immediately do that and started, check for a pulse.
Were her feet off the ground?
Yeah. I don't even know. I mean, I assume so. When I glanced down there, I saw there looked like a upturned kitty litter pail.
Huh.
Because I'm like, like I said, it was just so,
Sure.
I mean, I didn't even know, it just didn't even, I couldn't even process it, and it took me, 3 or 4 seconds just to, what is going on?
Yeah.
And then, like I said, that's my first reaction is to get the thing off of her, and I didn't even look where it was attached, just kind of flailing around and trying to pick her up and get the thing off, and then I realized, I'm like, am I going to get a knife or what? It's a cable, how am I going to cut it? And I look, and there's the thing, and then after I administered CPR and, checked for a pulse and breathing, I realized, okay, she's not breathing, I'm not going to be able to resuscitate her real quickly,
right.
And I ran upstairs, and that's when I did the whole phone thing I explained. So.
Gotcha.
By 8:51 p.m., just under an hour after Amy entered the home, first responders were inside trying to revive her. Then something strange happened. James was in the kitchen with police officers when one of the paramedics emerged from the basement. "She's fighting," the EMT said. James's response? Investigators needed fresh eyes on the crime scene. They used innovative techniques including laser scanning, which gives investigators an ability to manipulate a crime scene to recreate it. One of the detectives on the case was about 5 feet 6 inches tall, around the same height as Amy. Yet he could touch the ceiling of the Allan home basement if he reached for it. In other words, they started to wonder whether Amy could have hung herself at all. Detectives astutely observed that the key could be found in the extension cable itself. If the cable had any slack in it under stress, or put another way, if it stretched too much, detectives theorized that there would be no way Amy's feet would have been off the ground. So they shipped the extension cable to an engineering firm to do some experiments, constructing an apparatus that included the height of the ceiling and Amy's height and weight, which was 140 pounds. In the meantime, James was taken in for questioning. While holding on to suspicion, investigators believed that the motive was staring them right in the face, that he found out about Amy's infidelity. The illicit relationship with George had been going on for 3 years, but it was mostly just text and calls. The pair had only ever met in person twice. James himself wasn't clean either. He did admit that he had a one-night stand with a woman in the Isle of Man while he was with Amy before being presented with the text logs between Amy and George. James, it turned out, was genuinely shocked. He had no idea she was cheating on him. Detectives remarked that James was a talker, but when he was shown the logs, he went silent. He was given a polygraph test, which was inconclusive. The motive floundered. They genuinely believed James didn't know about the relationship. They were sent back to square one. Dr. Jill Cherry Bukowick was the attending trauma doctor at the University of Michigan when Amy was rolled into the ER. At 11:50 a.m. the morning after the incident, she called the Tecumseh Police Department with some concerning observations without suggesting foul play. She told detectives that there were minimal ligature markings around Amy's neck, which were inconsistent with a typical hanging injury. She also relayed that hospital staff were concerned about the degree of brain activity, or lack thereof, given the timeline of events that James gave. They were also concerned about Amy's lack of a history of mental and medical illness. But they also noticed James had an unusual reaction when the neurologist told him at 4 a.m. that it was unlikely that Amy was going to survive. Staff noticed he appeared stoic with no emotion and left the hospital an hour later with Ashley. Amy was subsequently hooked up to life support. Jill relayed that James didn't ask any of the routine questions families usually have in these types of situations. Only days after Amy's incident, James told Ashley to pack up her things and the cats because they were moving back to Ocala to room with his parents. According to his family, he had tried to take his own life with a pistol before they stopped him. Detectives would later find a suicide note he authored in his room. His parents were concerned he would hurt himself, so he was driven out of Tecumseh and to Ocala until his mental health improved. He had lost 14 pounds and stopped running, an activity to which he normally committed 50 miles per week. A couple of months later, in November, James met his new girlfriend at a running meet. James had by this point tried to move on, though his girlfriend told detectives that he talked about Amy with her, told her how traumatic it was to be investigated, and would occasionally grieve over photos of Amy. He had been doing therapy during this time and had been vacillating between guilt and anger over Amy. In any event, she described him as her rock. Her mother, who doesn't approve of any man she is with, said she adored him. Meanwhile, the autopsy on Amy was inconclusive, so the examiner could not determine whether Amy's death was a suicide or a homicide. Several people who spoke to detectives knew from the jump that something was strange about James's behavior. Detectives noticed too. A police report specifically noted that he asked them if they wanted to check him for defensive wounds. They told him he wasn't being accused of anything. A neighbor observed that whenever James would bury his face in his hands to cry, he would peek through his fingers to see if they were looking at him. One constant was that they hadn't seen a single tear roll down his face, despite all the emotions he appeared to be displaying. When he abruptly left the hospital, James said he didn't know what to do and said he didn't want to sit up at the hospital for, quote, hours on end. He eventually returned to the hospital at around 9 or 10 a.m. Days later, when Amy was pronounced deceased, it is said he wasn't there when it was declared. Detectives were now interested in what type of person James was, so they interviewed people, including his daughter, stepson Caleb, and a childhood friend. His daughter was interviewed right on the deck of the Tecumseh home. James, however, said he wanted to be present when she was being questioned. His mom was also there. Ashley said James and Amy were not fighting, there was no history of fighting between them, that Amy never spoke of depression or wanting to hurt herself, and that she didn't know of anyone who would want to hurt her mom. The detectives noticed she was very uncomfortable. While it may have been the shock of her mom's death, the detective noted that he felt the presence of James and his mom. He also noticed she never once looked at James while answering the questions. Meanwhile, the results of the experiment from the engineering firm came back. Using an exact replica of the extension cord supposedly used in Amy's alleged hanging, they found that Amy's weight would have brought her feet to the floor. That's because the cord would have stretched and have shown significant stretching due to the strain. The actual cord that was around Amy's neck on the night of September 14 showed no sign of such strain. 36-year-old James Allan was described as outgoing, positive, upbeat, and a hard worker and a good provider who, according to his girlfriend, was nerdy and would give the shirt off his back to anybody. He loved outdoor activities, including those he introduced Amy to, and had an affinity for mixed martial arts, of which he took classes in an earlier part of his life. But things weren't always smooth sailing for James. Growing up with him in church, a friend interviewed by detectives described a short-tempered guy with a checkered past. The friend alleged he once decapitated a cat with a machete. He further alleged that when they were 15 or 16, James allegedly threatened to kill his brother and himself when his brother said he was going to tell James's girlfriend that he was cheating on her. The friend also alleged that James stole things, took drugs such as ecstasy, acid, and ketamine, and partied hard. He would get into fights with other kids at church, the friend alleged. He was the crazy one in the family, he would say. But his family, who were relatively wealthy, bought him everything. He most recently did video production for an automotive accessories shop in Ann Arbor. In March, he received a pay raise that allowed the family to live comfortably. But more importantly, it allowed him to tighten his control over the family. Allow me to explain. James described himself as a type A personality. He was ambitious and thrived on structure and organization and sought to improve himself and others around him. He had taken measures over the last few years to make sure the family was physically and mentally fit. That, to him, apparently meant ruling the family with an iron fist, like a drill instructor who had zero tolerance for disobedience, according to accounts gathered by detectives. When the family was still in Ocala, for example, he installed security cameras on the home to keep track of Amy. He did not allow her to work, and the money she made when she did work was not allowed to be spent on herself. James, on the other hand, was allowed to do what he wished with his money, including buying himself vehicles. James controlled almost every aspect of the family. He tried to isolate Amy from her own. In the process of trying to do that, he isolated himself from his own parents when they refused to make up lies and stories to help with Amy's isolation, according to a police report. That's when he moved the family to Michigan, which Amy's mother believed was in part to isolate Amy further. No one in the home was allowed to have social media accounts. Caleb alleged James hacked their accounts and changed all the passwords. All electronic devices were attached to James' email accounts so he could monitor or be notified anytime there was a new download. He also tracked their phones. James had been on thin ice with Caleb from the many instances the boy said he had allegedly been abused by James. Firstly, Caleb said he was spanked as a child. His punishments involved staring at a wall all day. Amy would try sticking up for her son, but James always had his way. He recalled a time when James came home and, for some reason, threatened to burn his clothes. When Caleb said he would have to ask Amy because she bought them for him, James became aggressive and made fists as if he was going to punch him, but Caleb pushed him before he could do anything. Realizing what he had done, Caleb backed off, at which point James put him in a chokehold from behind, a move called the rear naked choke he reportedly learned from MMA class. Caleb said he struggled to breathe. Amy came into the room and told James to stop, but he didn't listen. Caleb said he was moments from passing out when Amy again told James to stop, to which he released his grip. The teen said when James realized what he had done, he appeared sorry and took the family out to McDonald's, but Caleb had trouble swallowing his food from the choke. During the ordeal, Caleb recalled James asking him why he couldn't just be a normal kid. Another traumatic experience Caleb conveyed to detectives was a time when he overheard an argument between James and Amy over the phone. When he ended the call, he called Amy an effing cunt. Caleb was bothered by that, so he asked his mom why she let him talk to her like that. She said, quote, "That doesn't bother me. It's when he calls me lazy when he bothers me." A few days later, James and Caleb were sitting in the living room when James asks him why he acts like he hates him. Caleb said he didn't like when he called his mom a cunt. James got mad and made a comment about not saying anything like that again. Caleb, anticipating a beating, curled up in a ball with his hands behind his head, and James allegedly hit him twice in the back of the head. The verbal and physical abuse forced Caleb's hand. At 17, he left the home and moved in with Amy's parents. He said his happiness improved significantly after the move. From then, James isolated Amy from her own son. But while Amy's mom said she didn't know of physical abuse directed at Amy, Caleb said someone on James's side of the family told the boy that he saw James choking Amy when they were very young. The man recalled to Caleb that he walked in on James telling Amy, "You'll do what I say." Because he kept track of the finances, whenever Amy visited Caleb, the boy had to pay for the meals so it wouldn't show that she was somewhere where she shouldn't have been. The last time Amy's mother saw her daughter was at Caleb's high school graduation in June 2017. Her mother had only been able to communicate with her a few times since then. In fact, the mother told detectives the day after Amy's incident that there had been verbal and mental abuse in the household. She reiterated that Amy had no history of mental illness, depression, or suicidal thoughts. Ashley herself had been fearful about saying anything that would upset her father. Amy's older sister Heather recalled a time when she told Amy that if she wanted to leave James, she would help her. Amy told her that James had told her he would never let her leave him. Amy's dad offered to pay for family counseling, but James rejected the proposition. James hadn't been on speaking terms with Amy's family for about the last 4 years out of their 15-year marriage. James claimed that Amy was a mean drunk and would get aggressive toward him, but admitted he was being a dick on the night of the incident. He had been complaining about everything at the bar, including about an incident at work in which his camera equipment was damaged, and the neighbors mowing the lawn and kicking up dust clouds. James's mother said Amy showed no signs of wanting to hurt herself, but said she had a, quote, quick trigger, and her killing herself must have been a, quote, split decision. Ultimately, detectives weren't buying James's emotional outbursts. Amy was not suicidal. The evidence showed she had been making vacation and meal plans leading up to her death. The engineering experiment showed Amy couldn't have hung herself because there was no sign of stress in the cord, and the ceiling was too low for that to happen anyway. There was also another piece of evidence from the medical table. Amy had suffered internal neck injuries consistent with a choke, according to prosecutors. A couple of years after her death, and 5 days before he was scheduled to get married to his new girlfriend in Ocala, James was arrested and charged with murder.
Want to sit in here for a second, and they're going to come in and talk to you, so you want to talk to them in just a second, okay?
I'm not going to be able to speak to them, so.
What's that?
I said I'm not going to be able to speak to them.
Okay, that's fine, and I'll let you tell them that, okay?
Okay.
Just bear with me for a minute, and we'll get you back in.
Mm-hmm.
If you have any questions, feel free to get a hold of us, or they can contact us. Okay?
It's how you sleep at night.
Well, I guess I don't understand that question.
Okay.
So, just so you know, and I'm not going to ask you any questions, but you have some serious soul searching to do, because I will tell you this much. You're being charged with open murder right now. And murder, or someone calls it death, someone else has a wide range, kind of they have different forms, okay? From manslaughter all the way up to first-degree murder. And I can tell you this much, sir. Science has proven that you were responsible. So you can deny it. Any denial on your part is a lie, okay? Understand this. Your side of the story goes a long way in deciding whether it's first-degree murder all the way down to manslaughter. I don't know. But I can tell you right now, you're looking at open murder. So you get with your attorney, you figure out, understand this, science has proven that you're responsible. Okay? If you don't want to talk, we'll leave it at that. Do you have anything?
No.
Okay. Good luck, sir.
There was no smoking gun or clear motive for the killing. Amy's parents believe Amy finally had enough of James pushing her around and wasn't aligning herself with his vision, pushing back against the selling of the home, walking alone from the bar, calling him a dick, and like his slave driver boss could have pushed him over the edge. It was probably a rear naked choke that he had allegedly previously used against her and Caleb that sealed her fate, a maneuver which would have prevented her, or at least made it difficult for her to defend herself against him, hence why there were no defensive wounds on him. He then staged the scene as a suicide. His defense team didn't buy it, of course. It claimed that it was ultimately Amy's behavior and emotions that led to her death. The defense claimed that he was watching TV and scrolling through his phone for shows during this time. It also said it is highly unlikely that he would have confronted her, snapped, killed her, staged the scene, and called emergency services all within 52 minutes. The defense also had a forensic pathologist report that Amy's injuries looked like asphyxia due to hanging. The defense had James's father and daughter Ashley testify on his behalf. The father said James had been devastated and largely unresponsive since Amy's death and had lost all interest in doing things. However, that could have also been from the fear that he could be arrested at any point. Ashley testified that her mom did display signs of trouble. She had allegedly been overindulging in alcohol and became drunk more easily and frequently, which made her more mean and violent. The defense ultimately argued it was her isolation, drinking, social anxiety, and odd behavior and guilt in her affair that led her to commit suicide. The prosecution had experts argue that Amy's injuries weren't typical of hanging victims, but did present as evidence of a choke. But as expected, it was the extension cord that proved to be the decisive factor. In September 2021, James Allan was convicted of second-degree murder. He was sentenced the next month to 20 to 45 years in prison. An important red flag you need to identify in any relationship is the good old-fashioned attempt to isolate you from other people. It is one of the key signs that the person you are with is controlling. Verbal, mental, emotional, financial, and certainly physical abuse should never ever be tolerated. You must respect yourself and have boundaries. Always have a close friend or family member nearby to assist in escaping, because doing so after being isolated from everyone is far more difficult. One underappreciated sign is being a financial hostage in a situation. If someone in a relationship is keeping you from working without a good reason, it could be a sign that they want you to be dependent on them financially, making it more difficult to escape their grip. If you are in a situation like this, think of Amy, and don't let her death be in vain. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to listen to me narrate this story, which was based primarily on the primary sources. Special thanks to the reporters who are first to inform us about these stories, and to you guys for engaging in the subject matter. Be well, feed the poor, and don't be James Allan. Goodbye.